Next up, we have the embodiments of the term tongue lashing, Lickitung and Lickilicky. The former is one of the most weirdly, underratedly adorable Pokemon from the first generation. In the anime, it was even caught by Jessie, although she would end up trading it for Team Rocket's signature Wobbuffet. Fun fact, in the first generation games, Lickitung actually lacks the attack Lick. It can't learn it for some reason. Also, there's that awesome Pokemon Stadium minigame involving Lickitungs and sushi. In the fourth generation, Lickitung showed off a new method of evolution. It evolved into the large, lumbering Lickilicky when leveled up while having learned Rollout. Today, we'll be examining if these two tongue twisters left the competitive scene tongue-tied, or if they wound up tripping over their own tongues. And so, we ask, how good were Lickitung and Lickilicky actually? And in this video, we'll be going over these competitive formats. The first generation was the best time to be a normal type. Stab Hyper Beam was amazing, and Stab Body Slam was incredibly spammable. The strength of these, in addition to the solid varied stats and move pools of most normal types, meant that even the less viable ones had some sort of unique niche. Lickitung was the sad exception to this rule. What makes this particularly sad is that it has some absolutely incredible traits. Traits that other normal types would kill for. Swords Dance is the main one, and Stab Rap is nothing to sneeze at as well, especially when backed by Swords Dance. If you gave either of these moves to any other normal type, their viability would skyrocket, let alone both. Unfortunately, Lickitung was let down by its stats. Its absolutely abysmal attack of base 55 meant it wasn't hitting very hard even after a boost, and it found it difficult to even fire off those boosted attacks thanks to its speed, which was equivalent to Snorlax and Slowbro, meaning it got outrun by just about everything. This also meant it wasn't at all an effective user of Rap. Finally, Lickitung's bulk was not completely terrible in and of itself, but it was effectively rendered completely terrible thanks to its terrible speed stat, which meant it was far more vulnerable to getting hit repeatedly. Swords Dance and Stab Rap were wasted on Lickitung, as it couldn't find a niche anywhere. Not OU, not UU, not even NU. In short, Gen 1 had Lickitung licked. Gen 2's additions of Leftovers and the improved recovery of Rest Calling Sleep Talk went a long way in making Lickitung deceptively tanky. It was also a beneficiary of the special stat splitting in two, as it gained the boosted base 75 special defense. It had no place whatsoever in the powerful Snorlax-dominated OU, and it struggled to establish a genuine niche in the Grand Bull heavy UU. However, in the far lower power levels of NU, Lickitung was not only legit, but was quite good. Its Body Slam was a reliable paralysis spreader, and made it difficult to switch into even if it wasn't dishing out much initial damage. Lickitung was excellent at tanking neutral hits. This meant it both was effective defensively and was able to grab multiple Swords Dance, thus offsetting its paltry attack stat. It was generally difficult to really instantly threaten Lickitung, and the few Pokemon that could, like Primeape and Hitmonlee, were absolutely ruined by Body Slam paralysis. Thus, most switches needed to pack Rest Talk to be able to shrug the paralysis off, but even this wasn't a perfect solution. Even sleep talking Pokemon could be taken advantage of by a sweeping Swords Dancing Lickitung. Additionally, Lickitung had the incredible valuable trait of being able to thwart and actually threaten Tier King Xatu. It didn't take much to support Lickitung either. It was great alongside Spikes, since it easily defeated all the Tier's flying types, and Spikes were incredibly popular anyway, so it wasn't like one had to go out of their way to support Lickitung with them. If one wanted to be safe, they could pair Lickitung with Pursuit support so it wouldn't be blanked by the occasional Ghastly, but Houndour was a solid Pokemon anyway, so this was also far from unreasonable. Overall, Lickitung was a fantastic Pokemon in GSC NU. It possessed valuable defensive utility and posed a vicious offensive threat, and did this with just one set. Gen 3's removal of max EVs across the board meant Lickitung could no longer pull double duty on both offense and defense. However, it was also buffed. First, it received even more bulk as a result of stat boosting natures, and second, it received several excellent utility moves. Wish was a tremendous recovery move that more than made up for the Sleep Talk nerf. It allowed Lickitung to heal up its teammates as well as itself. Lickitung was also able to directly help its teammates through the status clearing Heal Bell, thus packing a ton of support in just 2 move slots. Finally, Knockoff was also a solid option to gain an edge in drawn-out wars of attrition. The immensely power-crept OU and UU left no room for Lickitung, but that was fine, as it settled into another excellent niche in NU. There, it combined its support capabilities with incredible defensive utility, making it crucial on stall teams. Its ability to clear status was invaluable to thwart common attempts to break stall cores through use of Toxic. What made it even better was that it didn't necessarily need to use Heal Bell, as if it was paired with Chimecho, that would be covered. Thus, Lickitung Lickitung could use Knockoff or Toxic to better threaten the opposition. Knockoff also had solid surprise factor, as it caught unsuspecting Haunter expecting to blank Lickitung's usual sets, and it permanently crippled Sableye, as the loss of leftovers could not be heal belled off like Toxic could. Lickitung possessed some defensive qualities that were as unique as they were valuable. Most notably, it completely countered even Rain-powered Huntail, avoiding the 2-hit KO from a boosted Surf. Its ability to stall out Rain was made even easier thanks to Protect, which burned turns and simultaneously provided valuable incremental recovery. Protect was also valuable for making Lickitung even more irritating to deal with for Wailord, as if timed well, it could catch Wailord on a self-destruct and have it KO itself for nothing in return. Lickitung has some flexibility as well. Though max special defense was its preferred set for its ability to blank Huntail, it could also opt for physical defense investment, which allowed it to perform effective feats like switching into Choice Band Murkrow, all while retaining enough special bulk to still thwart threats like Plusle and Sunny Day Blossom. Now, Lickitung wasn't perfect. It could sometimes be on the passive side through its potentially exploitable reliance on the 2-turn recovery of Wish and Protect. However, for the most part, it was an excellent Pokemon that played a key role in Gen 3 NU, chalking up a second consecutive niche in the tier. Gen 4 saw Lickitung receive a much-needed evolution in the mighty Lickilicky, which came with a ton of incredible buffs. In addition to terrific stat boosts across the board, it also got the most threatening attack it could have asked for, Explosion, which was absolutely devastating with Stab alone, and could be boosted further with Swords Dance, Life Orb, or Choice Band. Now, OE's proliferation of steals and close combats meant Lickilicky wasn't able to quite break into the tier outside of a few gimmick teams, but for the first time, the Lickitung clan had use in UU. Lickilicky was decent in the tier, although it struggled to truly establish itself thanks to the presence of Clefable. Thanks to Magic Guard, Clefable completely outclassed it in the defensive role, and that same immunity to passive damage went a long way in making it a generally more reliable offensive Pokemon as well. Being able to ignore the recoil from its own Life Orb went an incredibly long way, as did its indifference to hazards and status. Of course, when it came to power, Lickilicky had Clefable beat by a long shot, and this is where its niche came in. Very little could force such huge damage or KOs like Lickilicky. Whether it desired the immediacy of strength provided by Choice Band, or increased flexibility in using its coverage options from Life Orb, the latter could combine with potentially even more power if it could successfully take a turn to Swords Dance, or it could ditch that entirely and run a fierce all-out attacking set, whose maximized coverage made switching into it safely an even more daunting task. Offensive Lickilicky was on the rarer side in UU, as between its lack of resistances accentuated by lack of defense investment and relatively low speed, it was a little tougher to get on the field. Plus, once it did hit the field, it required some prediction to get the most out of it, lest it boom haplessly into Registeel, Rhyperior, or a Ghost. However, the rewards were well worth it. Its threat level was such that unless you were running a gimmicky mono fighting team that gave Lickilicky literally zero room to come in, you did not want to see Lickilicky. But Lickilicky's lack of consistent use in UU led it to drop to NU, and there it was absolutely amazing. Its primary role saw it act as one of the tier's most important immovable special walls. NU's other go-to special tanks, Slowking, Hypno, and Gardevoir, were completely destroyed by Skunktank's pursuit, making it quite easy to forcibly remove them and then bowl the opposing team over with special attacks. However, Lickilicky had no such fears, and it was as unwavering as any of them in its ability to tank special attacks. It shrugged off Charizard's Life Orb Fire Blasts with ease, easily capable of countering it repeatedly through the course of a game. It effectively thwarted other top special threats like Jinx, Manectric, and Gardevoir as well. With Toxic, Lickilicky put offensive Pokemon on a timer, deterring would-be threats like Medicham and Hitmonchan from switching in safely. In addition to switching in and hard countering such top-tier special attackers, Lickilicky was generally nearly impossible to kill for most other offensive Pokemon. Between its lack of weaknesses, Protect accentuating its bulk while scouting explosions and choice users, and the fact that Toxic was a death sentence for so many Pokemon, Lickilicky came out on top one-on-one against even the likes of something as powerful as Magmortar. It was much more reliable to switch to a defensive Pokemon to slow Lickilicky down, but this just let it freely wish past to its teammates, reinforcing the defensive core around it and making its team even more difficult to break. Wish was, as always, excellent general team support, and was especially helpful for maintaining the health of recovery-lacking tanks like Regirock. Lickilicky was so consistently reliable defensively that its offensive sets were on the rarer side, which was impressive given how massively dangerous they were in a tier more vulnerable to it than UU. Its Swords Dance, Choice Band, and all-out attacking sets still saw usage on more aggressive teams, and they were predictable predictably excellent, especially as they punished defensive Pokemon switching in expecting a bulky Lickilicky. It was just that it was so difficult to give up the utterly immense defensive utility the specially defensive set provided. Lickilicky cast a looming nigh inimitable shadow over Nyu. It was one of the metagame's best, most defining Pokemon. And as Lickitung was now a not fully evolved Pokemon, it was eligible for Little Cup. This was fortuitous timing, as Generation 4 was where the tier started being played competitively. Sadly, Lickitung was on the niche side, as it was not bad in its own right, but had to compete directly with the incredible Munchlax, which was one of the absolute best Pokemon in the tier. Its main benefit was that it made for quite a pairing with Munchlax. Lickitung was simultaneously a fierce wall breaker, effortlessly ripping through Bronzor Gligar cores, and it lured in and beat down opposing Munchlax, both of which made it easier for its own Munchlax to clean up late game. Of course, pairing Lickitung and Munchlax meant one was stacking two of the slowest Pokemon in the tier, so one had to be careful in building teams that were especially good at withstanding counter assaults, especially against fighting types. This was quite limiting as opposed to the freedom afforded by faster, more offensive teams, and thus Lickitung was only seen once in a while. Its access to Wish was unique, but the fast-paced nature of Little Cup play meant defensive tactics were generally unfavorable. Nevertheless, Lickitung was no gimmick, and thanks to its unique offensive capabilities, it had a small but legitimate niche in Gen 4 Little Cup. Lickilicky loved the 5th generation buff of Wish now passing 50% of the user's maximum HP stat, instead of the flat 50% it had been before. Since Lickilicky had such massive HP, it would now be able to heal its teammates for huge amounts. It also received a great untauntable phasing move in Dragon Tail, letting it rack up spikes damage for the bulky teams it fit best on. Its offensive sets had been nerfed incredibly hard by the halved reduction of Explosion's power, but its defensive set seemed poised to have another successful generation. Sadly, this was not the case. Lickilicky was not a bad Pokemon in Gen 5 RU and NU, however it was more or less entirely outclassed by Alomomola in both tiers, as well as Clefable in RU. The 5th generation brought an influx of fighting types, and Lickilicky had to run in terror from them, while Alomomola shrugged them off as it did just about everything else. Mola also had a much easier time staying at high health without being forced into exploitable protect patterns thanks to the absolutely incredible Regenerator. This was especially key when spikes were absolutely everywhere, something Lickilicky had not had to deal with previously. In addition to making it more difficult for Lickilicky to stay healthy without giving up tons of free turns, spikes also made it far more difficult for Lickilicky to wall things in the first place. It was no longer nigh immovable for NU's Charizard, whereas Mola also had the benefit of resisting Fire Blast. Lickilicky did have the advantage of Heal Bell, but clearing status wasn't valuable enough to justify using a Pokemon so much more vulnerable than Alomomola when it came to, well, everything. Lickilicky's NU usage wasn't low enough to send it to untiered, but it wouldn't have been unjustified if it had. Defensive play became a lot more viable in Little Cup thanks to the addition of Eviolite, an item which made Lickitung one of the bulkiest Pokemon around. Wish and Heal Bell were rare in Little Cup, and access to them alongside its great bulk and phasing capability made Lickitung a popular choice on many stall teams. Staving off Abra and Snover was invaluable, as was relieving its team of the many burns dispensed by the tier's numerous Scald and Will-O-Wisp users. The main issue holding Lickitung back was that its 2-turn recovery was more of a hindrance than ever in a tier with so much passive weather damage. If a team didn't have Snover, chances were it had Hippopotas. Lickitung sadly couldn't use Cloud9 in conjunction with Wish. If it could, it would have been much better. Lickitung's forced passivity was especially dangerous in a tier with so many great fighting types. Giving completely free turns to the likes of Mienfoo and Timber was generally not great. However, this was something insurmountable with good team support and play. If Lickitung's teammates kept hazards off with Rapid Span and maintained spikes of their own, Lickitung could stay healthy upon entry and could threaten those fighting types with a spike-stacked Dragon Tail. In any case, Lickitung was distinct in being able to stave off special attackers while supporting its team, and thus earned itself a legitimate niche in Gen 5 Little Cup. Lickilicky got another small but highly useful buff in Gen 6. Its Oblivious ability was buffed to now Repel Taunt. This was enough for it to get used very briefly on one gimmicky OU stall team. However, overall, it was not enough for Lickilicky. Even this, in conjunction with Gen 6 addition of the new lowest tier in PU, did not do much to help it find any viability. Once again, it wasn't a bad Pokemon in its own right, and once again, it was outclassed as a Wish Passer by a competitor with Regenerator. This time, it was fellow normal type Audino. It speaks to the power of Regenerator in terms of actually being able to consistently perform defensively that Audino was so much better than Lickilicky, despite the latter being far bulkier. Lickilicky wasn't able to act as an offensive threat either, as it was completely outdone by Ursaring and Buffalon. Somehow Lickilicky managed to get enough usage to avoid going to untiered for the second consecutive generation. Who knew it was such a fan favorite? But it was still not at all useful even all the way down in PU. Gen 6 Little Cup saw Lickitung follow in the footsteps of its evolution. It was not a truly really bad Pokemon in and of itself, but it was almost entirely outdone by Spritzee as a Wish Passer and Cleric, right down to the fact that Spritzee's Aroma Veil blocked Taunt as well, while also blocking Encore. Spritzee was so much better because it countered the ever-present Mienfoo and could potentially threaten the sweep of its own with Calm Mind. It also packed multiple useful resistances with its Fairy typing, meaning it was still useful defensively if it lost its Eviolite, unlike Lickitung, who had to walk on eggshells to avoid such a fate. Spritzee was generally one of the better Pokemon in the meta, so while Lickitung wasn't unviable or anything, it wasn't used much, as it was just completely overshadowed. Generation 7 PU was almost an exact repeat of the previous generation for Lickilicky. As a result of being completely and utterly outclassed by Audino, it was not used ever. The main difference was that this time around, the tier was much more crowded, which made Lickilicky a lot easier to forget. As a result, it finally tumbled down to untiered. That was it for Lickilicky. It more or less took Generation 7 off and was barely spared a thought. Lickitung followed suit. Thanks to Spritzee being a top Pokemon, nobody thought to use Lickitung in Generation 7 Little Cup, as they would be making their team worse by doing so. Maybe if you really liked Lickitung as a Pokemon, you could theoretically justify some sort of niche for it, but it would not be a competitively driven decision. Lickilicky joined the 8th generation fray in the Isle of Armor, where it finally found a niche in PU thanks to the significantly decreased Pokedex. It was one of the best special walling choices in the tier, being able to help stave off terrifying threats like Appleton, Lilligant, Kadabra, Mr. Rhyme, and Galarian Mr. Mime. It wasn't a truly hard counter to these, but it was a solid check, which was valuable in a metagame as starved for options against these threats as PU was at the time. Lickilicky's enormous wishes were even more appreciated by its teammates than ever, since many of them were foregoing leftovers in favor of heavy-duty boots, and thus enjoyed every extra bit of recovery they could get. Lickilicky's passivity meant it risked losing momentum, and thus didn't fit on every kind of team, but it was great at what it did when it could be fit, and thus it had a solid place in PU. Sadly, Lickilicky lost this niche in the Crown Tundra. Aromatisse came and outclassed it entirely. For the same exact reason, Spritzee had twice outclassed Lickitung in the Little Cup. Thus, Lickilicky has once again dropped to untiered. Lickitung looked to have a niche when it arrived in Isle of Armor, as it was able to check the terrifying Abra. It also received Body Press, which allowed it to surprise Pawniard. However, its old issues were still as prominent, glaring, and exploitable as ever between its lack of resist, reliance on 2-turn recovery, and utter fear of losing Eviolite. Thus, it didn't really take off. And that's it. So how good were Lickitung and Lickilicky actually? Well, Lickitung had a rough start in its debut generation, but was great in the following 2 generations of NU. Things seemed to be looking up when it evolved into Lickilicky in Generation 4, which not only shone in NU, but also posed a threat in UU. However, Gen 5 brought that to a screeching halt. Defensive sets were outshone by Alomomola, and offensive sets were crippled by the Explosion nerf. Sadly, it didn't get buffed enough in the following generations, and its usage more or less completely dropped off the map, until Gen 8's Isle of Armor. However, even that was short-lived, as its niche and usage was gone as soon as the Crown Tundra came along. As for Lickitung, it had a couple decent generations of Little Cup, but eventually, it was outclassed by a Spritzee, and never really recovered. Overall, though Lickitung and Lickilicky were quite decent in the earlier generations, they've been neglected since then, but if they receive some buffs, they'll likely find places again, hopefully. Thanks for watching, everyone, and as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to False Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content, and in the comments, I want to know what do you think about competitive Lickilicky or Lickitung? How would you buff it? Whatever it is, let me know in the comments. Also, thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos, and thank you to everyone else watching as well. And follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.